Travels of the Ellis Arbor is a TTRPG story set in the world of Bastion using the Vagrant Sun campaign setting. Tune in for episode 43, Esoteric. Helplessly, the crew watched as the final motes of light began to drift from their encampment, and Moore's husk of a form limped slowly to one side. A quiet fell upon all of them, until Edward rushed toward his companion's side. Fear took hold of the boy. He turned the mushroom over to inspect what had occurred. Charred and flaky, myconid flesh was coarse in his hands. He seemed lighter and more fragile than usual, even for a myconid of such small stature. With glassy eyes and a quivering tone on his voice, he looked toward the captain with a glimmer of sadness.
What do we do? What happened? Is there anything we have in our possession? Carpathian, surely you must know something. Tell me. Help him!
Even through sobbing and gritted teeth, Edward felt the captain rush to his side. Darian placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and then over the form of Moore's body. There was still a warmth under the charred flesh, enough to believe that there was, perhaps, something they could do. Darian placed a reassuring hand on Edward's tousled hair, and turned toward Carpathian.
I agree. Certainly there's something we can do for Moore. Come, inspect. Use your magic.
Somewhat begrudgingly, Carpathian took a few steps toward the scene.
I will. You'd better be prepared, however. It is likely to draw attention to our encampment. I cannot hold our abjurative wards aloft while also inspecting Moore's body. You decide what is more important, our safety or our myconid friend. I cannot promise I can help.
At this, Edward shot a look of determination toward the wizard.
Anything. I'll watch the tree line. You do what you can for Moore.
The young gunsmith wiped a tear from his face, hoisted his rifle under his arm, and began to survey the perimeter. All the while, the corner of his eye was trained upon the ritual that was to take place. Hands clasped around his staff, Carpathian raised it into the air. Motes of red and green light began to glimmer from the crystals at its top, before flashing in a rhythmic sequence. As he brought the staff to the ground, a faint crackle of energy was the precursor to the end of their abjurative wards, and the beginning of this magical ritual. Muttering words under his breath, he enacted his magical sight. His hobgoblin eyes flashed in the same rhythmic sequence, oscillating between the colors like the crystals on his staff. In a matter of moments, Carpathian attuned his senses to the etheric planes and began to survey Moore's form. The warmth that Darian felt, Carpathian could see, pulsing with a soft, almost translucent light. He could see that life had not completely left Moore. Clearly, they were drained of vitality, but not of their life essence. As his view began to clarify, Carpathian began to map the lines of arcana that wound between Moore, the forest, and the trajectory of the soft, yellow woad spores. Beyond a doubt, there was a connection. Though the spores had drifted freely away, they tethered themselves to the environment, like a web of mycelium, giving and receiving energy like a vast ecosystem. Moore had simply been tethered to its inner workings, the lifeblood of the jungle they now found themselves in. Having no need for a material body, the jungle seemed to have simply cast Moore aside, attaching itself to their etheric body. As he pulled back from the spell, Carpathian's eyes returned to dark, black pupils, and he addressed the captain and the gunslinger.
They're alive for certain. As for how this occurred or how to correct it, I cannot say. The jungle appears to have folded them into its arms, feeding off their etheric body, and returning with a life essence of its own. This is an esoteric natural art, not one of arcana. I'm not certain I could correct it without severing Moore's connection to the jungle spores.
He turned his attention toward Edward.
That would almost certainly risk Moore's life. I cannot intercede here.
A look of defeat washed over Edward as he heard those words. He'd hoped that, perhaps, there was a simple way to heal more of their affliction. Knowing that there was nothing they could do in the short term was, in a word, disheartening. He hoped only that Moore wasn't suffering.
Then we have to leave this place. We should head at once to the city that was spoken of in those notes. Midas Cairn, wasn't it? We might find Nout. We might find shelter, but we must help to break this curse upon Moore.
We cannot. We've no idea how far the journey is to Midas Cairn. We've not rested since that last battle. You must be patient, Ed.
The gunsmith's tone shifted on a dime.
Patient? We've been chasing after Nout for months. How on earth do you expect me to rest while our friend is in this state? We have to continue through the jungle. What if his condition worsens while we sleep? I could never forgive myself if...
As his words continued to boil, Darian could swear he saw that orange, fiery light of Ed's devil eye burning from beneath the glass of his goggles. But something shifted in their environment, enough for the captain's attention to be immediately drawn elsewhere.
Ed, hush! Eyes to the tree line. I hear something.
Unarmed as he was, Darian dropped to his knee, drawing the dagger in his boot and pointing with his free hand northward toward the jungle interior. Motes of greenish yellow light began to emerge in pairs, not oscillating like the spores, but bright and angry, like tiny orbs of incandescent embers. Accompanying them, a pair of crackling, gnarled creatures emerged. It seemed at first like the limbs of a tree blowing in a strong wind, though, as they peered out of the darkness, like the decayed bark of an ancient tree, long arms began to drag themselves free of the darkness. A pair of haphazardly cobbled tree creatures began to draw closer to the group. Without hesitation, Edward turned to face these boreal monstrosities.
I said, we've not time to dawdle!
Hoisting his rifle and aiming squarely at the nearest tree ant, he fired a bead of molten hot fire into what resembled a face. A scorch across the air that crackled like an ember before impacting. The lights of its eyes turned a violent white before violently bursting. Fire and cinder rained down from its face, and the tendrils of blackened charcoal spun through the air. Darian and Carpathian could only watch as the next moments unfolded. As the embers twisted through the jungle air, some caught wayward spores, haplessly drifting in a stagnant breeze. And as they collided, more and more of these soft, green spores began to burst, exploding in a fiery cascade of superheated bark. In a matter of moments, the jungles of Silas Mar were alight, and the crew of the Ellis Arbor abandoned their campsite, away from the lethal explosion of woad spores. Travels of the Ellis Arbor is made possible by the generous support of our subscribers, followers, and most notably, our patrons. Thanks to all our new and existing patrons for our Moon, Wedge, Crown, and Hex tier subscriptions. Please subscribe, give a like or a comment, follow us on Twitter, and stay tuned for the next episode. Make sure to follow us here on YouTube, on Spotify, and on twitch.tv/lonomy. Don't forget, take care of each other.